And of course, now I hear the lawnmowers coming. So somebody signal if it becomes inaudible, and I'll close. 1 second, hold that thought. Talk amongst yourselves.
Gotta love COVID.
The joys of working from home.
It's actually the
Sorry
fun.
about that. All right. The windows aren't thick enough, but where was I? Oh yes, school reopening. So most of them are planning on multiple fronts. They're hoping for and planning for in-person schooling. But many of them are working on a hybrid model where they are planning for a blend of in-person and online. And so, and that might happen with staggered schedules. It might happen with, kind of, one group is in this week, but not in the next week, or kids, groups come in every other day, or however it might look. And once again, kind of a brief reopening before the summer break gives them an opportunity to focus on the kinks. So what does this mean for the world of relocation, and specifically for New York and Greater New York? The reality is school is opening, and however we feel about it, wherever we might be, wherever your assignees might be thinking of going, school is going to be happening, and families and their employers should be prepared for this. Admissions offices, although schools have been closed, admissions offices in private and international schools have remained open throughout the pandemic. And they've really been bending over backwards to make the whole application process as user-friendly and as rich as possible for prospective families. Their application forms were already online, but obviously they have moved to virtual tours. So like what Christine was talking about with housing, they could do it before, but now it's really become the norm of really presenting their school as fully as they can through a virtual tour. They have been increasingly flexible when it comes to testing. So for example, if you think of the New York private schools, they require the IC or the ISEE test. Well, there have not been any tests scheduled. And so schools have become much more flexible in terms of being willing to take different kinds of assessments of students. For families who have not been able to track down a teacher to write a recommendation, they've perhaps been willing to accept recommendation from another source, or if a teacher couldn't send a recommendation, they would speak with a teacher. So schools, admissions has been happening all along. That said, a lot of schools are still really unsure of what their rosters look like for the fall. They have current families who are kind of undecided whether they're going to come back, or they have, especially schools that serve expats, that expat population that remains a little bit up in the air. So our advice is that if you have an assignee whom you are thinking of moving, and there's been a little bit that kind of that very natural feeling of, what, we want to wait and see if this assignment really happens, and then we'll focus on the schooling. Our advice is, don't wait. Whether you use us or you use another education company or you use DSP or however families do it, they should really be encouraged to be proceeding with school applications wherever they think they may be going, even if there's a chance that they won't follow through. There is some good news in all of this for families who are moving to the New York area. For one thing, so with a lot of the New York private schools, they would typically have finalized their rosters and practically closed their doors to admissions by this point in the year. And so when families find out kind of, April, May, June that they're being asked to relocate, there are schools that will consider late applicants, either just because they happen to have a spot in a given year or because they work on rolling admissions and they cater more to international families and so forth. But there's always a group of schools where there really is a very slim chance of being accepted if you've missed application deadlines. And of course, because of the way these things go, when all of these assignees are moving, never with their average children, but with their brilliant children, they come into the process with a list of, my colleagues tell me these are the best schools in New York. And I really don't want to take this assignment unless my kids can get into these schools. And usually, step one of the process of anybody helping a family with education is to kind of help them put down that unrealistic expectation. So the good news right now, without being opportunistic about it, is that a lot of schools that would not usually have openings, or they think they may have openings, or they're hedging their bets. There was, as you all know, there was the exodus from New York when all of this started, and there are a certain number of families out there who were saying, hey, we kind of like living in Connecticut, or we like Long Island, or maybe we don't actually want to go back to the city, or maybe we're not sure we want to pay that private school tuition if our kids are going to be sitting at home doing this online, even if just part-time. And, they were part of the rugby team. And even if kids go back to school for classes, they're not going to be in a body heap. And so maybe we're going to not sign that contract this year. So we have a local population that is a little bit undecided. And we have not, a lot of the relocation churn has been on hold. And so a lot of the schools that would be in that group where they would, as it was, really only look at kids in an intake year, which would be kindergarten, 6th or 9th, are now saying, you know what, we will look at a kid for 7th grade. Or we haven't finalized our class lists. And so we will consider families. And so for those families who are perhaps at this point saying, you know what, maybe we will relocate after all, there may actually be more possibilities for them than there would have been in a normal year. The other thing that we're seeing is that schools are changing their contract and their deposit or refund policies. So traditionally, when a school would offer you places for your children, you have X amount of time and then you sign a contract and you pay a deposit. And then, families would sometimes say, occasionally, well, I've changed my mind and my kids got into another school and we don't want to use that school after all. Can you help us get the deposit back? And the news was actually usually even worse than that, which is not only that it was a binding contract that you signed, and not only will you not get your deposit back, but if you really read that contract, you'll see that you are responsible for the entire year's tuition. And so that's the sad reality, and it was written that way to prevent you from doing exactly what you're doing. Schools right now are being a lot more flexible. So, and it's a question that we're asking a lot of international schools. Could you please send us your latest policy on refunds? Should a family accept a spot right now for 3 kids in London, and then they can't move because there's another outbreak? And all of them that we've been in touch with are being very reasonable and saying, if a situation changes and a family can't relocate because of COVID-19, we will, of course, make a refund. And some of them have even made partial refunds for the spring semester, acknowledging that kids couldn't actually enjoy the full program that they were offering. I would use this, though, as a moment to say, please, one should always do this, but please do encourage assignees to read those school contracts carefully as they always should, and also to specifically ask a school kind of new questions for the checklist. What will your policy be if we cannot relocate because of an outbreak? And also a brand new question, but it will be one for the future for all of us. What did you do for your students during COVID-19? And what do you have sort of sitting on the back burner that you will provide for them should you need to jump into distance learning again? And, you know, as with all things, as we evolve, kind of the whole process changes. And I know that for us, kind of from the education world, that this has provided a whole new, kind of a whole addition to what we will look at as we assess schools. Kind of what is your plan B?